Milton Lawson, it's good to see you again.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome to everyone in the Sophia audience and the larger meaningoflife.tv, bloggingheads.tv audience. This is the Sophia program, available on streaming video and audio podcast. I'm Daniel Kaufman, professor of philosophy at Missouri State, and I edit and publish an online magazine called the Electric Agora. I'm here once again, very, very pleased to be here again with Milton Lawson. Milton, why don't you, even though you've been on quite a number of times with both Ari and I, why don't you just say a few things just to remind everyone in the audience who you are and what sorts of things you do?
Sure, thanks. Milton Lawson, comic book writer based out of Houston, Texas, home of the cheating Houston Astros that Bob Wright has discussed at length in a recent episode of bloggingheads.tv. I'll try not to go into that and cry on camera. And I was a former video editor for Blogging Heads, and I've got some comics coming this year.
Milton, I never asked you this. I'm just curious. What's your education background? In other words, were you educated in the things you're doing, or did you get a degree in something entirely different, and this is sort of stuff that you do just on the basis of your own skill, talent, etc.?
Yeah, it's been a very circuitous route. I went into the University of Houston as a physics major.
Oh, wow.
And I was very interested in science, and quantum physics, the equations there just totally kicked my butt. So I rapidly changed into radio, television, and film, which changed into journalism. And so I had I've got this background of both technical and creative, and I try to synthesize those into a lot of different things. And that's how I became involved in Blogging Heads. I did a lot of web work and editing and a little bit of the journalism stuff, but for the most part, I was doing the technical stuff.
And what about the art? And all the art and art designing that you do.
Well,
that's all self-taught. That's all.
I was lucky enough to be employed in the very beginning of the .com boom, and was with one of the best sort of ground up little design shops in Houston that took on big clients back when there were no service providers to do that sort of stuff. So I learned alongside a lot of really talented people. Like a lot of the design stuff I learned was from people that were from the electronic music and rave community, because they learned all that stuff to create their flyers and promote their events. And they just started making money off of it doing corporate work.
Very interesting. So today we're going to discuss two films that might to some people seem completely unrelated, but they're both distinguished by having received not a single Oscar nomination. And those two films are Uncut Gems and My Name is Dolemite. Dolemite Is My Name, excuse me.
Right, yeah, I make that mistake all the time.
The new Eddie Murphy film. Of course, the Uncut Gems is the new Adam Sandler film. We're going to discuss Uncut Gems first. Obviously, for both films, this is going to be filled with spoilers, and so if people haven't seen either of these films yet, I really do strongly recommend both of them. I think Milton likes them both too, but we're not really here to give a review, but more analysis and maybe some discussion of them in the context of the Oscars. So Milton, why don't we start? Why don't you start off? Just give me some of your impressions of Uncut Gems, whether interpretive or aesthetic or political or whatever you want. Just say a few things about it by way of easing us into this.
The first thing I would want to mention about it is that when I thought of how to describe this movie to people, I said, how on the side of cigarette packages, they are required by law to put a Surgeon General's warning. And I think Uncut Gems requires a Surgeon General's warning at the beginning, because this film is going to put you in a very stressful place very quickly and be unrelenting on that. I think the missions, I haven't read a single interview with the creators I would like to do that. But I can't help but imagine that the idea that spawned them was, I think they looked at the last 20 minutes of Goodfellas, that insane paranoid.
When he's all coked up and he's
yeah. And they said, you know what? We want to make a 2-hour and 20-minute movie at that level. Can we do that? And they did. It is just relentless, and it'll raise your blood pressure and put you in the headspace of someone who has all the walls crashing in around them, and give you that visceral experience, both from Adam Sandler's performance and also the use of sound, the use of editing, and just the frantic pace of every moment is filled with some sort of a noise or a pan of the camera, and you just, it never lets you go.
Yeah. I was really very impressed. Listen, I knew that Adam Sandler was a good actor. Obviously he was. I thought he was one of the best of that group, that period of Saturday Night Live. I thought he was terrific on it. I loved the fact that he could just do comedy in so many different ways. He could, just make up songs that were funny and play them on, the Hanukkah song. I mean, these things are just wonderful. I forget the name of the character that appears on the news that does things in an operatic. He basically sings everything. Absolutely hilarious. But he's sort of, so I knew he was a good comedian. I always liked him. And, I also knew that he could be quite a good actor, even not in comedy. One movie of his that I really truly adore, and I don't know if you've seen this one, is The Wedding Singer.
I have not seen that one.
Yeah, well, I really recommend it. It's a lovely movie, and he's wonderful in it. I mean, and it is a romantic sort of comedy, but I would say that there's plenty of opportunity there for him to show his dramatic chops. But here, he just did something entirely at a different level. I mean, here, his performance in this is so good, and I hope we're going to be able to. We'll talk about part of what makes it so good. But I'm really rather shocked that at least he was not nominated, let alone the director or the film itself, or even some of the supporting actors. The young woman who plays his girlfriend is fantastic, and from what I understand, she's a no-name. She just did nothing, did an advertisement or something, and then that was it.
Yeah.
Should probably just say for the audience, I mean, just to sketch quickly, the movie is about the Adam Sandler character, who is a jeweler in the jewelry district, in the diamond district in New York. And this is one of the really things about the movie. He's a very specific niche kind of jeweler. Because normally when you think of the diamond district in New York, you think of the black hatted Hasids and that whole culture. And at first, when I heard about the movie, I thought that's what it was going to be set. But he is in a specific niche as a jeweler. He serves a clientele that consists primarily of black musicians and athletes. And so the kind of jewelry that he's selling and producing is this kind of very over-the-top, gaudy, big, clunky sort of stuff that I think has probably been the choice of certainly rap artists going all the way back to the 80s, right? I don't know if that's ever changed. I don't know. Maybe because you know pop culture better than I do, when this became a thing with athletes, with black athletes. But in any event, that's the setting. That's the situation. He also has a serious gambling problem. And the entire movie sort of sees him trying to juggle his sales and his gambling debts and shift money one place to the other and sort of pawn things and all to avoid these sort of bookie thugs who have been sent out after him. He also has a family. Things are not good between him and his wife. He no longer lives there. He's got a girlfriend. And so it's just this sort of frantically paced, as you said, film about, a day or two in this guy's life. I thought his performance was extraordinary, and we can talk a little bit more about why. But I want to pass it back to you.
Well, I would think one of the reasons why, maybe one of the unsung heroes of the film, I don't know who performed this duty or how collaborative it was, but the makeup and costuming for Adam Sandler's character allowed this performer, who is a world-known figure, he's a brand name into himself, totally disappear into this character.
Yeah.
I think they did something with his teeth. He had
a prosthetic, I think, on his top teeth.
Yeah. And that sort of subtly changed the way that he talked and the way that his facial expressions worked. And he had these really thick glasses and kind of really unkempt hair. And he was shot at a lot of angles to where he was kind of a little bit obscured. And so you almost immediately forget that this is Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
And it gave it almost like a documentarian sort of feel to it. And like you, I knew that he was talented, and I knew he had the gear to do drama because I saw Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah.
And that film has its adherents. And
I don't know why that got hated on so much. I thought that was quite an excellent movie.
It is, but I observe it as, it definitely has a niche following, especially, that was his first time, as far as I know, to really go towards a more dramatic performance. So his built-in audience may not have been ready for that, And so I knew he had the talent, I knew he had the gear, but what he accomplished here, I was not expecting at all. This is like, Daniel Day-Lewis level of immersion of just creating an entirely new being.
Yeah. So maybe I'll say something about what impressed me so much about him and about the movie more generally. And indeed, it impressed me so much that it actually, I found myself thinking about it for days afterwards. And it actually inspired me to write an essay. Not about the film, but about an issue that the film raises that I think is important and also very profound. And that is, the character he plays should in every way on paper be a really unlikable guy. Okay. First of all, he's involved in a trade that already is dirty. And we're given right from the beginning evidence of how dirty it is. The opening of the movie is actually in gem mines in Ethiopia. And we always have, and it reminds us immediately in a very strong way, hits us right in the face of what an exploitive industry this entire precious stones industry is.
Yeah.
That it's done on the backs of pretty much essentially indentured labor that don't recover anything remotely close to the amounts of money that the gems then sell for when they're sold in the West. In very hazardous conditions, you're risking your life working in those mines, and so it starts right off. So he's in a dirty trade. He's a pathological gambling addict, to the point to which he jeopardizes everything, not just himself, but the well-being of his family and all the people around him. He just throughout the movie just makes every single bad judgment that you could imagine, right? I mean, and even when there's a moment when he gets a reprieve, right? Something works out and he gets a bundle of money and he can finally pay these crazy psychopaths off and get some order. He goes and takes it and bets again to try to even make more money. I mean, it's just absolutely, you should hate this man. Okay.
Yeah.
And yet, by the end of the movie, I was praying that it would work out for him. I mean, I was really, really praying that it would work out for him. And somehow, throughout it all, I thought he was very humanized. Mm-hmm. I thought that through all the things I just described, I got the impression that there was a fundamental decency buried in there. He thought he was trying, you know what I mean? I never got any sense of malice from him. I never got any sense from him that he actually didn't care about the people in his life. I just got more the sense that here was a desperately, terribly broken man with just about the worst collection of personality traits you could have, who was just trying frantically to try to make the best of it, given who he was and what he was. And so it raised for me very profound questions about just what our attitude should be towards such people. You know, I had an interesting conversation with my wife after the movie, and because we saw it together, and she hated him. And she hated the movie because she hated him. And she's like, this movie didn't work for me because I was glad finally that he got a bullet in the face, which is what happens to him at the end. He gets killed. And she and I then had this long argument about whether that's the right way to feel about someone, even someone who's wrong, right? Even someone whose troubles are their own fault.
Yeah.
Do we really wish ill upon them? Especially, you know, it just raised a lot of issues for me. I really felt for the guy. It made me painfully aware of my own faults and the ways in which I've also probably put people in jeopardy because of those faults. I don't know how you feel, but I was really, maybe this is just struck too personally for me in a way that doesn't translate. But I think that all worked because Sandler is so good.
Yes.
So I don't know how you feel about that character and what you saw as what you took away from it as your main.
I am reminded that tension behind the likability and attractiveness of the character for certain qualities, and that win you over in spite of all of these horrific decisions he's making. You do end up rooting for his success, but you also, as an individual in a society, don't want to sanction that behavior on a macro level. And so the film and the filmmakers, this is one of the tropes. Like when I was working on a project once that was in the gangster genre, and I wanted to really immerse myself in some criticism of the genre and some academic studies of the genre. And I found a number of expressly detailed out tropes. And one of them was the fact that the protagonist in the end must be dealt some judgment, must be brought to justice either through the system or outside of the system, either through gangster violence or the law. And most gangster films do have that conclusion in spite of the fact that we are sold on their allure. And one of the great things that Roger Ebert brought to his film criticism was he noted that one of the things that we love as audiences about protagonists are protagonists that have a work ethic and have a capacity at what they do. Even if it's something that we don't agree with, we respect the hustle, we respect the intelligence. And the only way that characters like this can succeed and get it as far as they can is due to this enormous intelligence to see all of those angles and somehow survive. It is that intelligence that allows him to survive way past what many other people would have happen if they were in the same set of circumstances, making the same set of bad judgments. So that kind of wins us over as an audience, and we want to see more of it. But at the end, we don't want to sanction that, and so I think it was a very fitting ending.
Yeah, look, it had to end that way.
Yeah.
Because the man simply, I mean, look, he was a gambling addict, but really what he was a chaos addict. He everything he did always produced more chaos rather than alleviating it. But I guess part of the reason I found it such an important portrayal was because I do feel and please feel free to disagree with this, but I do feel we are currently in a time when not only are we so inclined to identify others as bad, to sort of render judgment upon them, but that we think that part of what's required in doing that is to be gleeful in their suffering, right? And what this did was it pushed you on that. It said, okay, here's a guy who we're just going to stipulate it's wrong and bad, okay?
Yeah.
And we're going to put him through the ringer, and finally we're going to put him in the fucking ground.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to feel about that? And all I could feel was I felt a profound sense of pity. But my wife was gleeful, and that's why she said the movie didn't work. And I see this in a lot of areas. I just wrote an essay. It's totally an unrelated area, but about having to do with politics and stuff like that, and about a philosophy professor who basically said he was going to ruin this other person because the other person had written about things that he didn't want people writing about, and was absolutely gleeful about it, right?
Mm-hmm,
and it just raised the question in my mind. It's like, maybe this is a testament to the extent to how much we no longer even have a sort of a racial memory of a sort of Christian notion of forgiveness, right? But sure, people deserve judgment for or punishment for the bad things they do. But should our attitude towards them when that punishment comes be one of glee? Right, and I thought that the film really forced us to look at that, right?
Right.
By humanizing him so much,
right? By
not making him easy to hate, despite the fact that on paper, clearly, right, the guy's terrible. Yeah. So I don't know how you feel about any of that, or.
Well, I have a pretty strong feeling about it, but it's very unique to me, or I don't know if it's unique to me, but. I have a certain unfortunate life experience where I have a very close family member whose life was destroyed through a gambling addiction. And what the film...
This must have spoken to you in a way that...
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And what I think the film does really well is it puts you in the place of a quasi-family member of that person. And what it's like to be a family member of a person going down that spiral is this bafflement. You're able to, from a remove, see that all of these bad choices are so obviously bad that this person that you love or respect or have family ties to, it's really hard to separate that love and that connection and that fond feeling from your judgment on the person, and it causes you to not fully realize the true severity of the choices and the true trajectory that person is on. You think, well, I know that person. This is just a temporary thing because I've known them before they had this horrible spiral happening, and they're smart and they're good at what they do. They're going to see the error of their ways, and it allows you to, or it forces you into some sort of a denial. And it's only certain external events, that the ones that inevitably come, that wake you up from it.
Let me ask you this, and please, if you don't want to answer it, don't. But since there are no names involved, I don't see that there's a violation of confidence. I'm sure you believed that this person was deserving of consequence.
Right.
But did you actually actively wish ill upon them?
Not in the moment. I discovered.
And when the comeuppance came, were you gleeful about it? Were you glad about it?
No, not at all. However, I did not have the full picture at the time. There were other character defects, this person in general that caused a complete reframing of my attitude. But in the time, I was always pushing towards the optimistic outcome. And when everything fell apart and prison time came, there was actually there were some weird quirks with the incarceration math, because this person did stuff in multiple states, and certain states didn't communicate the right information, and the fractions of good time in this state versus good time in that state don't add up properly. So I actually had to, help figure out and explain to two different state, incarceration systems, like, hey, this is why your math is wrong. So I didn't feel glee in that moment. I was still trying to help that person.
Yeah. I have an overwhelming sense today that we as a collective society are as pitiless as I've ever seen. And it seems to me that this bothers me a lot. Listen, there's plenty of people I think are terrible people. I don't wish them ruined. I don't wish their livelihoods taken away. I don't wish that their family members would weep and cry. In other words, I don't understand this attitude today, and it's being so widespread.
Yeah.
And somehow something about this movie, to me, it really zeroed in on that. And it's sort of, by creating this character portrait, it sort of forced me to really think about not just what does he deserve, but if he gets it, how will I feel about it? And because he does get it, I realized that what I felt was pity. And sadness, not, oh, good, that bastard finally got his, I just didn't feel that way, but my wife had the opposite reaction. And so anyway, that's sort of what stood out about me. And I think that was affected by his performance. I don't think just anybody doing that character, even with that script, it would have worked. There's something about him that made him likable, despite the fact that he basically does nothing good the entire movie. Yeah. Do you think that's the Sandler? Is that Sandler coming through, or do you think that's the performance? Because Sandler himself has a likable affect, right? So do you think that's sort of Sandlerism sort of coming through, or do you think that the performance was so good?
I don't think you can necessarily separate the two, because there is that twinkle to him, and they humanize him in one area with this relationship with this young woman, and every detail of that relationship feels wrong and doomed. And even the moment where they try to show a loving side of him, there's like this creepy sort of voyeuristic manipulation that's happening.
He's very jealous and
yeah. And even in spite of all of those factors, there's a likability to it. And I think in that respect, I think a lot of the credit is also due to the leading actress.
The people who he's bouncing off of. Yeah.
Since she is okay with this behavior and finds something to love in this guy, it gives us as an audience permission to, at least once again, set those things aside and continue on the journey with this guy.
Yeah. About the question of Oscar nominations, do you want to deal with that after we do Dolemite sort of as a package? Why did neither of these films, or would you like to talk about it, do you think, with respect to each individually?
Why don't we just do it at the end, just because I think the only thing I can convey to here, I read an interview with an Oscar voter, quote unquote, off the record, that mentioned both of these films. So the fact that person talked about both
as a package. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's switch and talk about, unless you want to say something else about Uncut Gems, we can also go back and forth, but why don't we talk a little bit about Dolemite Is My Name. So this represents sort of, I don't know, it feels like a return for Eddie Murphy, though I guess he kind of never went away. I mean, I guess he made movies. They just weren't very well received, a lot of them. And it was sort of previewed by his appearance on Saturday Night Live after having been away since he had been a cast member back in the 80s. And so I almost felt like that Saturday Night Live appearance and then this film are sort of intended as kind of a relaunch for him. I don't know if he's explicitly said that. Has he explicitly described himself as relaunching?
I don't think he explicitly said it, but it's definitely clear. Did you see his appearance that he did on Jerry Seinfeld's show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee?
Yes. There he said he wanted to do stand-up again, right?
Yes. And the Eddie that was in that car and talking to Jerry was a new person compared to the Eddie that we've seen for a good 15 years or so. You know, there were all these behind-the-scenes stories about him, you know, not necessarily being the easiest person to work with, and there seemed to be a dark edge to him. And the joy of the early Eddie, the early stand-up, the early SNL stuff, kind of, it was gone. It was completely gone at some point. And then when he got in that car with Jerry Seinfeld, there was just this smile on his face all the time. And he had these loving reminiscences of his time as a stand-up, and the fact that he bonded with Jerry on the craft of stand-up and referencing other comedians and other scenes and specific venues, that brought out a side to him that we hadn't seen in a really long time.
Yeah. So the film, it's not really, it's sort of a biopic, but I mean, from what I understand, it's relatively loose. But it's based on a real person. Is it Rudy Ray Moore?
I think that sounds right.
Yeah. Who actually is quite an important figure in the history of entertainment. For one thing, he is a significant major player in the blaxploitation subgenre. And growing up in the 70s, I was very much aware of and watched many of the installments in the blaxploitation genre. And so when I saw this, I realized that I had seen Rudy Ray Moore stuff and hadn't even sort of made the – let me make sure I've got this name right. I don't want to call him the wrong name the entire – yeah, okay, Rudy Ray Moore, excuse me. I realized I'd seen all these movies and just hadn't put it together. Secondly, Rudy Ray Moore is considered to be the sort of the godfather or the grandfather of all rap, right? Because of the specific sort of way he did his stand-up, which was kind of a rhymey, talky, very foul-mouthed kind of delivery, and also hearkening back to actually very, very much older African traditions. The one thing is that he would sort of was sort of his centerpiece was the signifying monkey, which, if you know your rap history, the first original true gangster rapper, Schoolie D from Philadelphia, did his own version of signifying monkey called Signifying Rapper, which actually was in the Abel Ferrara movie Bad Lieutenant, and then was stripped out because it sampled Led Zeppelin, Kashmir, and Zeppelin sued. So you can. I'm gonna put a link to it to the song which is from Schoolie D's album Smoke Some Kill. I'm gonna put a link to it because Schoolie's obscure enough that I think a lot of people won't be familiar with this. But so Moore is also really important because his stand-up involved a kind of trash talking rapping that then became ubiquitous in rap music. So the film is about him, with Eddie Murphy playing the character, and about how he first became a stand-up comic with a certain notoriety, and then eventually launched into pictures, and creating a number of very well-known blaxploitation films. Did you want to add anything just about the film itself and the situation? Any thoughts you had? Were you already familiar with the Rudy Ray Moore character?
Nowhere near at the just tangentially, nowhere near at the level that you were. The the primary draw for this film for me is I'm big fans of the screenwriters, Scott Alexander and Larry Shashevsky. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name. They have this niche of films where they find true life, eccentric characters that accomplish some sort of notoriety and not necessarily universally beloved for that the accomplishments. For example, Ed Wood, Larry Flint.
Oh, did they do the Ed Wood movie?
Yeah, they wrote the Ed Wood movie.
And The People versus Larry Flint? Oh, wow. Okay,
People
so
versus
this
Larry
is
Flint.
a seriously high-quality writing team.
And they also did the Andy Kaufman Man on the Moon story. So they are attracted to these one-of-a-kind characters, and they take you on this journey. And each one of those characters has forces of allied against them that want to tell them all, like, hey, you're crazy. Not only is the thing you're doing bad or mediocre or not worthy of consideration among whatever, body of people make these decisions, they're also mentally unsound, maybe. And we're gonna, put that label on them. Whereas these guys have a way of representing those characters and turning them into truly inspirational figures. And as someone who is endeavoring in a niche art form myself, there's always a struggle, and you kind of sometimes feel like a weirdo and an outcast. And these kind of stories appeal to me a lot. And I think Dolemite is one of their best ones because
did they do the Crumb movie?
No,
because he's another character like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So have you also been a big Eddie Murphy fan?
Huge. I mean, Eddie Murphy was my middle school existence. Pretty much every day at the bus stop, me and my friends, all we would do, every Monday morning is recite every line we could from whatever Eddie Murphy did on Saturday Night Live before. And then when we would sneak into, the R-rated films he was in, we had bootleg tapes of Comedian, which is better known by most people as Delirious, because that was the name of the video special. I was a huge fan.
I wore the tape out on Delirious. I mean, I watched that so many times. For me, the major draw was that this was the return of Eddie Murphy. I was really struck. I don't know. Did you watch the Saturday Night Live that he appeared on?
Yes.
Do you remember at the beginning when at the introduction to the show, one of the cast members actually just flat out said, now everybody's going to remember why nobody's watched Saturday Night Live since Eddie Murphy left, right? I mean, they basically admitted that they're terrible. They admitted that they're terrible. And the current Saturday Night Live is such a disastrous, terrible embarrassment that it's so
You're too kind.
It's so unfunny, and it's so woke in the most stupid, annoying kind of way that's not funny also. And totally betrays the edge that the show always used to have. It was always countercultural, and now it's orthodox, right? I mean, which is what could be worse than orthodox Saturday Night Live, right? But it just, and I'm going to tie something with Dolemite into that also, that I'm really hoping this will make something happen that will break the current woke stranglehold on popular culture. But so I was already struck watching the Eddie Murphy. It wasn't just that the cast member admitted that they were basically terrible. But then watching Eddie Murphy reprise a lot of these roles, you realize, okay, he's just redoing shit he already did, and it's better than anything that's been on Saturday Night Live for 15 years, right? I mean, it was really – I'm actually surprised SNL did it. I mean, they really exposed themselves, I think. And please, of course, feel free to disagree. But this is just my impression. And so then going into the Dolemite, I'm like, okay, Eddie Murphy's coming back. And then seeing him play Dolemite, and the fact that the Dolomites, that Wood's routines were so filthy and politically incorrect, and so reminiscent of the ways in which Eddie Murphy's stand-up was politically incorrect, that I was just really blown away from it. And similar to Uncut Gems, here's something where I would say is maybe a bit of a similarity. The character Eddie Murphy is so likable that it disarms any discomfort that audiences might have with the language and stuff, because we're very puritanical now. I mean, that kind of comedy don't fly today. I mean, you can do it, but you just get huge, condemnation and also sort of that, so I really was kind of blown away for all those sorts of reasons. I don't know how you feel about this SNL performance and then him going into this, and what do you think just in general about what this represents?
Well, there's one aspect of Dolemite that I cannot go without mentioning, so let me set that aside for a second and get to it. But on the SNL thing, I largely agree with your critique of SNL in general. I think the exception is maybe once every 3 weeks or so, there's one sketch that has some humor and goes viral. But over the past 10 years or so, they seem to have at least one redeeming performer surrounded by a bunch of people that you can't stand. And right now, for me, that person would be Kate McKinnon. I basically adore anything she does. And even when she's in a terrible sketch, she elevates the sketch. But just last week, I actually thought they had a good episode with Adam Driver last week. Most of that was really well done. And Kate McKinnon, I don't know if you saw that one, but Kate McKinnon plays the devil, welcoming Alan Dershowitz to his just rewards, and also bringing people like Mark Zuckerberg there. So it was delicious, and she's great. But in general, I agree with you. If you compare the last 10 years or so of just your median sketch compared to what they were able to deliver during the Eddie Murphy years, it's not even comparable.
Yeah. So why don't you give your impressions of Dolemite Is My Name? I've said some things about it. Why don't you say some things about it? What did you think?
The one thing
stood out to you.
Yeah, the one thing we haven't mentioned yet, and it's on a very parallel track to Eddie Murphy's story with this film, and that is Wesley Snipes'.
Oh God, is he
story
good
with this film?
God, is he good in this?
Talk about a guy who had some original warmth and beloving feelings to audiences in general, who somewhere along the way lost his way, and in fact, the one thing that people will remember about him is hey, ain't that the guy that cheated on his taxes? And didn't he used to do good movies? And nobody hired.
I didn't even know that about that. He's been such a non-entity in my consciousness that I didn't even know that. The last thing my memory of him is entirely New Jack City, right?
Okay,
which I love, which is a great movie. But anyway, go on. Yeah.
And one other thing that he's related to is something we may talk about in the future, and that's Blade.
Yeah.
So just like Eddie Murphy, he has this long pause between very well-regarded performances, and this one is stunning.
He's almost unrecognizable.
Totally unrecognizable.
And his speech is totally out of...
Yeah. I've never seen him do something like this. His body language and affectations. I've never seen any footage of the real person that he's portraying, so I don't know if he's just doing a really uncanny, great synthesis of what that person was like, or if he just created a new character out of whole cloth. I would like to find that out. I'm sure a commenter will let me know. But he is riveting every moment that he's on screen. And
listen, I knew he could do comedy because White Men Can't Jump is a hilarious movie. Him and Woody Harrelson are just wonderful in it. But this was hilarious and completely against type. He was almost effete. I mean, it was bizarre. It was weird. And he's such a macho kind of – I always think of him as extremely manly. And in this, I mean, if I hadn't been told it was Wesley Snipes, I think I might have not even realized it.
Yeah. And he brings the antagonism that all of these other films from that screenwriting duo do, but like with Larry Flint, it's the state that's coming down on him, whereas this character is sort of a collaborator, unwillingly brought in, and he has this hilarious dismissive attitude, and we're identifying with the Eddie Murphy Dolemite character so much. Normally, we might feel some sort of antagonism towards this guy, and he's just adorable. You want to spend more time with him. And I just thought he was fantastic.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And let me ask you this. So this is what the point I was going to make regarding this film and its relationship to Eddie Murphy and to comedy. Here's what I'm wondering. Does this film, in a sense you could say, if you were doing this premeditatedly, it would be very clever, right? So you're doing a film that's essentially a period piece about a major figure in the a significant figure in the blaxploitation genre, a very uplifting story, a man who seemed to be fundamentally decent in a very serious way. I kept waiting in the movie for his fall, in the sense of that the fame would get to him and he'd turn into an asshole. Never happens. His loyalty is remarkably is an admirable. He will give anybody a chance. He will never throw anybody under a bus. And from what I understand, that's relatively true to the actual man. But the comedy is absolutely filthy, and it's sexist. And it's racist. I mean, with all the over the top kung fuism and all that sort of thing, right?
I have a question for you on that. Since you're much more familiar with this figure than I am, the film takes the attitude that these guys are kind of in on the joke and regard those elements as kind of comedic, and they're just playing fun with it. But is that really what the attitude was at the time?
You mean in terms of are you asking whether the sort of blaxploitation was self-aware and ironic?
No, that like for example, there's a scene where there's a love scene where Dolemite is trying to portray his prowess, and it's played off as just like, okay, we all know this is ludicrous. We're gonna just go with it. We're gonna pretend that this
and ham it up. They do it in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I do know that the real man, Rudy Ray Moore. I mean, he knew he wasn't under the impression that he was making AAA level films. I mean, he was not. I mean, he was not stupid or unself-aware. He was doing what he found to be fun and rewarding. And what I do know from what I've read and from what I remember is that the fundamental decency of the man that Murphy communicates is generally said to be true of the man in real life. I thought the actress who played the woman that comes into his circle that he meets in a bar when the woman's husband basically leaves her, and she's very overweight and sort of exactly not who you would think would be a comedic performer, and Eddie Murphy just totally boosts her. I mean, the characters boost her, and she winds up being a tremendous talent. I thought that was very powerful and well done. But
I definitely want to see her in more things. I've never seen her before.
Yeah, I'd like to see her in more things too. I really liked her. And I love I forget the name of the actor, but he was in Hot Tub Time Machine, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. He was in this too, and he was wonderful. Robinson, I think is his last name. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, tell me what you think about this. Look, I don't want to go so far, and it would be false to say that, you can't do filthy, sexist, homophobic comedy anymore, because obviously you can. I mean, Dave Chappelle is out there insulting and offending everybody, and there are others. But one does it today to massive public disapproval. And unless one has incredible fortitude and enough of a platform like a Chappelle or a Ricky Gervais has, you're going to get canceled for it. You just are, right? And that wasn't true, obviously, in the 70s and 80s. I mean, you know, I guess what I'm asking you, Milton, is do you think that Eddie Murphy coming back to Saturday Night Live, Eddie Murphy doing this movie about this particular character, do you think we may be seeing motion in the direction back of allowing our society and culture allowing comedy to be no holds barred again, such that we could have a new generation of Sam Kinnisons and Andrew Dice Clays and Howard Sterns of the old Howard Stern, and sort of, or do you think that it won't have that sort of efficacy?
I think that trajectory is going to happen, and I think it may be for a few adjacent but slightly different reasons.
Please explain.
I used to go to open mic comedy nights a lot in the early aughts. There was a really great scene here in Houston. Houston was home to one of the best venues for recording live studio audience comedy albums. There was just something about the acoustics and the density of the crowd. So like some of Mitch Hedberg's albums were recorded there. And so I'm very familiar with the vibe in a open mic night and an established act night. And I haven't gone in a while, and I've gone to a few recently. And I felt that there was this tension in the audience that never existed before. Every time a comedian would bring something out there, and you've got that visceral moment of laughter that's in your pipe, and you're ready to release it, and that joy is what comedy is all about. I could feel everyone in the room at certain points quickly hitting pause on themselves and going to the mental spreadsheet of like, okay, wait a minute, is this okay to laugh at? Did this cross a line? Am I going to be a bad person for sanctioning this particular joke? And just for a second, I could feel that pause, and then the relief when everyone did decide like, okay, yeah, we're good with this. This is cool. We're fine. That sort of tension I never really felt in stand-up comedy joints a long time ago. I only felt those sort of things like after the moment that someone clearly went too far, and you're like, oh wow, that guy went too far. That's crazy. And
you know, I'm assuming I shouldn't have assumed this, and so I'm just going to ask you: do you think comedy should be no holds barred? Stand-up comedy should be no holds barred?
Absolutely. Like, I reveled in, and of course the experience for every individual is going to be to a certain, you're inevitably going to find someone that, quote unquote, offends you in some sort of fashion that you like. There was a really famous comedian, that, died tragically young and had a big following in Texas, and the guy's material just wasn't for me. I found his material to just be a recitation of racial cliches, and his audience loved him for whatever reason. I'm not judging that audience at all. It didn't work for me. I'm not going to say that guy should not do comedy. He just wasn't for me. And like even the Michael Richards thing, which was clearly idiotic and wrong, I felt I understood the environment that sort of thing came from, because there was this no holds barred attitude in comedy, especially at open mic nights. You sort of, I think everybody went into those experiences with a certain, granting a certain amount of latitude to people. And I think audiences now are tired of that feeling of restraint, and are looking forward to, not feeling judged themselves as an audience member. And, I don't think you're necessarily going to have the same kinds of figures that you cited, like, Sam Kinison or Andrew Dice Clay or whatever. But I think you will.
Or a much older Red Fox or Richard Pryor. I mean,
right. I mean,
this stuff was filthy. It was very much on the edge. It was very, racially objectionable. I mean, and all. The irony, of course, is that back then, the plight of all these groups was actually far worse than it is today. And yet people then were not outraged about this humor in the way that people today are, which is just so true across the board of so many things. I find the temperature and the volume of protest today completely incommensurate with the actual condition of the people who are sort of voicing it, because I have a good enough memory to remember what things were like. I remember when the only women in offices were secretaries, right? And yet you could make jokes in the 70s, right? And it's not as if there wasn't a powerful feminist movement in the 70s, right? There was. But there wasn't this kind of public censoriousness. I really worried, and it was just a few years ago, I think, when this Hannah Gadsby Nanette dropped, I really thought, okay, comedy's finished. Like, if this now is what's going to pass for comedy, right? And then some of the other sort of, really bad woke comics that just are not funny at all, right? And who they kept trying to foist on everyone to try to get people to like them, even though they didn't. I really was worried, and I guess what I'm wondering is whether the return of Eddie Murphy, the fact that you're making a movie like this, which features a lot of stand-up, which if it was done contemporarily would get you just completely canceled, right? Whether it signals that things are loosening up again and people have sort of had enough about this, and it sounds to me like you think that it is.
I think it is. I think the greater threat to stand-up comedy is actually technology and social media, and
explain that.
Not just from the fear of being caught saying the wrong thing, but the unit of entertainment these days are just growing shorter and shorter, and attention span shorter and shorter.
I see.
And if a comic actually does land on a hilarious bit, the temptation for that performer is going to be to get that bit out there, get it viral, and then that's how we're going to consume these things. It's like the music conundrum as well, the single versus the album. The unit of the 45-minute stand-up comedy special right now is thriving really well on Netflix, and there's an audience for it. But the thing I worry about is the sessions that the comedians have to go through to be able to put those, 8-minute chunks into a larger, fully unified, hour set. Are they all going to just be spoiled by just posting segments of them online?
Right. Are you talking sort of almost like the TikTokification of comedy?
Yeah.
That some of the fact that everything is delivered now in these tiny pieces is a problem, structural problem for stand-up comedy?
Yeah, I think so. I think, having a unified hour that consists of 7 or 8-minute chunks that are thematically consistent but also distinct. I think the temptation is going to be out there. Hey, I've got a cool 8-minute chunk. Put it out there.
I see. So that the comedians are going to, in a sense, alter. In other words, they're going to increasingly go towards a shorter and shorter form.
Or even the audiences are going to just steal them and post them. I mean, yeah. I'm sure that audiences have no problem surrendering their phones when they go see the likes of Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy. But for other comics, I don't think you can demand that of the audiences these days. Yeah. Although I wish they could, including movie theaters. One
last thing about Dolemite. About I don't think Eddie Murphy's lost anything. Do you? I mean, I was actually quite shocked. He seems to have it's like no time passed at all. It's like he's the old Eddie Murphy again, it seems.
Yeah, and that did not surprise me in the course of a feature film, because a feature film can be edited together You just got to hit your energy moment, just a few times a day. Where he really surprised me was the SNL,
he nailed all of those revived.
Yeah.
The Gumby sequence was so funny that the other actors couldn't keep it together. They were like falling apart. The Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was amazing. And even the original sketch that they threw at the end was fantastic as well. He had amazing energy all the way throughout.
Yeah, yeah. So you're not surprised that after all this time he hasn't lost anything?
I'm surprised that he was able to get back to that place just because it had been so long since we had seen it. I'm a big sports fan, so I'm accustomed to the decline, and so and so doesn't have their fastball anymore, and you feel that in every dimension of life, and seeing this performer seem to fade away, but then come back at 100% is just I didn't expect it.
Literally decades later. I mean, I was kind of blown away by it. All right, so let's just move on to the last thing now, and that is let's talk about Oscars. You said you talked to an insider. I read an interview. Okay, you read an interview. I'm sorry, you read an interview with him. So, could you tell us, what was in what that said, and then your take on it relative to it, or your own individual take on it?
Yeah,
I'm struck by the complete total ignoring of these two films. And there are films that are being nominated and people that are being nominated that I think are demonstrably, obviously not as good. So sure. What did this insider say, and what do you think?
Well, reading and interpreting the motives behind Academy voters is a bizarre science into itself. There's an entire blog niche of award season folks who track the ups and downs of films, directors, performers, their so-called, Oscar, the potential or likelihood of winning. And it's a year-round game that begins with the initial rollout with certain film festivals. It continues on with the way that the film is received. Then the quote unquote Oscar campaign itself is another dimension. The availability that the performers and directors give to journalists and Academy members, they are judged on how they go about it. And there's this double standard where in the right moment, a person being really eager and demonstrating that they respect the Academy's perspective, it comes off as endearing to those voters. But then other people at another moment for another project demonstrating the same amount of eagerness rubs them the wrong way. And so interpreting what's right at what time is just this bizarre, just useless exercise that people try to. But to give you the two examples, for Eddie Murphy in particular, this Academy voter was a senior citizen, white male, and his response was, yes, the performance in Dolemite was at, Oscar caliber level. However, he wanted it too much by campaigning and doing the whole Saturday Night Live resurgence. And he felt that crossed the line of like, too much politicking, too much eagerness, and therefore he doesn't want to reward that kind of behavior in the future.
That's incredible.
Okay, and then the same person said...
I'm stunned. Anyway, go on.
The same person said, oh, yes, Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems, clearly an Oscar-caliber performance. It was amazing. However, given the kind of work he did before, I would never view him as capable of that sort of thing. So this is really just his proof of concept. And so now that he's demonstrated he can do something like this, then I'll consider him the next time around. So it's just the like prejudging and these inconsistent criteria that they put on everyone is just such a frustrating exercise. And when you go back and you look at the performances in the films that win the award in a given year, and you compare it to the other things that were available, it's always just beyond maddening.
This just causes me to, before you get to your own impressions or hunches, this does sort of strike me, and it's perfectly believable to me that all the people who vote are equally whimsical and just sort of capricious. And I wonder why on earth do the awards have any significance then? You know what I mean? In other words, if that's the sort of thing, the basis, well, why the hell does anybody give a shit whether they get an Oscar or not? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And sort of, in other words, if that's the kind of decision making that's involved,
right,
then why does it carry any weight with anybody? It's very strange, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is I personally, I still am enraptured by the whole pomp of it and the tradition of it. And every year I feel like there's at least one of these awards. It's perfectly timed. It's going to go to the right person for the right thing. And I'm just going to enjoy that. And I'm going to justify my support of this institution and viewing this. And it is a celebration of movies. And even the folks that I disagree with, they are voted on by peers. And in every category, there's at least one person that I think totally deserves it. Yeah. So
I think that there's plenty of deserving in this crop, right? I mean, I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is deserving. I think Irishman is deserving. I think Jojo Rabbit is deserving. Jojo Rabbit I could say, is one of the best movies I've seen in a decade. I mean, I was blown away by Jojo Rabbit. But I just found this surprising. So what's your hunch? I mean, do you think that basically both of these films just died a death by 1,000 cuts of these kinds of whimsical, bullshitty kind of reasons? Or do you have a hunch that there was something else, maybe an undercurrent or something that prevented them from being considered?
I don't have a good hunch on this year in particular, because this is a really strange year. And I think the institution of the Academy, they are at least absorbing some criticism, whereas back in the 80s and 90s, they did what they did, and tough shit. Yeah. Whereas now they are at least trying to respond to a certain criticism. Some categories, like several years ago, the documentary category changed its rules, and you have a lot better options now. And this year, like the fact that Joker somehow is the top nominated film, it indicates a year that all of these weird criteria that they don't know what to think anymore. And it's just pure chaos. Like, I think a film like 1917, if that kind of film were even possible in the 90s, or the early aughts, that would be a clear, obvious, nomination hoarding, 14 nomination, clear front runner for the award. And now it may win, but there are other factors at play. Yeah. And I think the whole game of, sleuthing out what Oscar voters think is, it's just become really hard in the past few years. And I think they're still in a transition, and I think they are making some improvements and making some better choices in a lot of places. But it's still.
How would you characterize the transition?
Well,
from what to what?
Well, in the Best Picture race in particular, And well, in a number of categories, I do think that the year that the nominations came out and were entirely every one of the top 5 categories was 100% white, and the hashtag Oscars So White came about. I think, these are Hollywood liberals, and they want to feel woke, and they want to feel responding and legitimately invested in some of those choices. And they quickly turned on a dime and made substantial efforts to empower creators of other ethnicities, other races, and put money and prestige projects in the hands of the kind of people that they normally wouldn't. And it has paid off. And there are a lot of perspectives and films that never would have even been made, I think, at the level that they are being made at now because of that pivot. And now that we are in that era, I think they're still figuring out, they're still figuring out what is quote unquote an Oscar film, because, and all the other thing they did, they increased the category from 5 to 10 maximum nominees. And back when there was only 5, the kind of film that would get into that short of a short list, had to fit only certain criteria. They could only consider hard drama. That you could never get something like a Joker or something like Dolemite. Yeah. There'd be no chance at something like that back then. But nowadays, with the wider set, it's at least conceivable that these would be legitimate contenders. Yeah.
It's interesting though. That's what you said in terms of what you said, that there's a certain irony then in the fact that, the hashtag Hollywood So White, and that they're really trying to move away from that. That this year we have a pretty much all black movie about a great classic black figure from the 70s and from this black genre that completely got ignored. But I think you're probably right in that, there may not be much there in terms of, because the process is so haphazard, and because there's so many variables that come to play, and because, you don't know what the basis these people are voting on, and that there probably isn't any sort of significance to it.
And there's also one other key prejudice in the minds of the voters, which is they are reluctantly embracing digital delivery and studios like Netflix, because Dolemite was made by Netflix, The Irishman was made by Netflix, and even as short as 3 years ago, that would have been inconceivable. We're not going to empower these guys. These guys are taking away our game. Right.
Right.
And so.
Well, I hadn't even thought of that angle of it, but yes, of course. Yeah. Now, of course, The Irishman is nominated for a number of things.
Yes.
So, yes. Apparently that's not completely disqualifying, but it makes perfect sense. That Amazon and Netflix as studios are direct competitors with Hollywood, and the Oscars is a Hollywood thing. So that
it's not disqualifying, but I do think that if everything else was completely the same about The Irishman, and it had been released by Warner Brothers in movie theaters first, it would be a no doubt Best Picture winner. Not even, it would be the favorite. Yeah. You wouldn't even think about it. But the fact that it's coming from that gives the community a ding against it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's very interesting. So I guess we could sort of wrap up. There's other movies we want to talk about that I'm hoping that we'll do future installments on. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit just before we close about what upcoming projects you've got going on and anything that you'd like to promote.
I appreciate that. I've got one project that I did last month that's very pertinent to our discussion here. I was inspired by a film critic that I really love, David Ehrlich. One of the things he does every year is he does a video supercut of the best films of the year. And he has this really cool format that he does.
You made one yourself, didn't you?
Yeah. And
I watched it. I thought that was great. I thought that was really good.
I made it for the decade as a whole because I knew I couldn't compete with David on that on the yearly front. And so I stole his format, or gave homage to it, however you want to interpret that. And I did a video countdown of my 25 favorite films of the decade, and set it to music. And I guess we can put the link in.
Absolutely, we definitely will. I really enjoyed that, even though my list would have been different.
Sure.
A lot of you really came through that. I felt I could see you in it. You know what I mean? Really, really good.
Yeah, and I'll warn the viewers that there's one extremely polarizing choice in there, and there's one pure popcorn flick in there that leads off the video, and a number of the more snobbish film fans out there immediately turned off my video because of that. So give it a chance. Give it more than 3 minutes.
The people are allowed to like things different from you. Yeah. And what about upcoming?
So I'm proud to finally be able to announce that my first comic miniseries is coming out probably at the end of September. It's titled Thompson Heller Detective Interstellar. It's going to be published by...
That's a great name.
Oh, thank you. It's a private detective science fiction story. It's about a private detective that wanders the galaxy solving cases, and he specializes in cases that have more of a political or moral aspect to them. And he's noted throughout the galaxy as a atheist / skeptic, and he's starting to fall in love with a woman that's a religious academic. And this project was born in a writing workshop, and a really renowned comic writer gave us an exercise which said, hey, you need to create a new property. And the way you're going to do this is you're going to take some existing person and put them in an entirely different context. And through that exercise of taking an existing person and putting him in that totally new context, you're going to create an original character, an original property. And so what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to take the journalist Christopher Hitchens and I'm going to turn him into a detective and put him in space.
Wow.
So this is basically Christopher Hitchens in space, solving.
And this is a comic that's going to be published, or this is a show.
It's a comic.
And where is it going to? Who's publishing? I mean, where is it going to appear?
So it's going to be published by a partnership between Source Point Press and Comics Experience Publishing, and it'll be available in comic shops starting at the end of September, and it'll come out monthly. First issue in September, second issue in October, third issue in December, and then soon after that, we will compile it into a collection.
And is it all you, or do you have collaborators? Are you part of do you have collaborators, or did you make? Are you a one-man band, I guess?
Oh, no chance. I'm beyond blessed to have one of the best comic artists in the business doing the artwork. His name's Dave Chisholm. And right now, this guy, he's sort of under the radar. That's why I was able to work with him. He's doing the best work of his career, not on my project. He did great work on my project, but he's working on something right now that's really super special, and it's going to come out around November of this year. And I think it's destined to get there's an award. It's funny, we talk about awards. The Oscars, quote unquote, of the comic book industry are called the Eisner Awards, and I think it will be an absolute crime if Dave is not nominated a couple of years from now.
Well, let's make sure to link to his stuff too, because that sounds really fascinating. Well, I wish you all the best of luck, and I look forward to more discussions with you. We want to talk about where the MCU is going, the Marvel Universe is going next in the films, because Phase 4 and Phase 5 have already been laid out. We know what the movies are going to be, so I hope to talk to you about that. And there's a few other films I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about Bird Box and Us, one of which you've seen, and so you'll have to watch the other one.
Yeah.
We can talk about it. But I thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.
That's a psych on everyone. We have a postscript. Milton wanted to ask me something on air, so you're going to get a little encore here.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask there, because he's a professor. One of the things that I've loved in previous episodes of Sophia, you've done a number of episodes where you've talked about a given film or TV series, and you explicitly shift the conversation at a certain point from the direct appreciation of the work itself, and then you shift gears and you say, okay, now we're going to elevate the discussion and go to the cultural criticism angle. And that's something I've enjoyed hearing a lot about in the various episodes where you've done that. However, that's a game that I don't feel equipped to play. I just don't have the educational grounding or the vocabulary in that realm. And since you're a professor, I was going to ask for a syllabus, a reading list for some good introductory works on just, cultural criticism in general, maybe stuff that involves topics on the intersection of art and politics, maybe.
Yeah. And, I wish I could claim that this sort of comes from any specific study. So, I do philosophy. I do academic philosophy, and that includes ethical philosophy, political philosophy, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing I do. I also teach aesthetics, and and art criticism, and so I read, Susan Sontag's and others who Joan Didion and others who cross into sort of cultural criticism territory quite a lot. Sontag has a famous piece on camp. She's got a famous piece on photography. Joan Didion, obviously, her cultural criticism crosses decades. And she was writing for Vogue and all sorts of other publications. And then these essays would be sort of collected into collections like Slouching Towards Bethlehem or the White Album. And I guess, if I was pushed, I would say the two people whose sort of cultural criticism has most influenced me, it would be Joan Didion and it would be Hunter S. Thompson. So if you read Hunter S. Thompson's essays, that's full of that sort of just mishmash and intersection of contemporary popular culture, arts, letters, as well as politics, and I'm not talking about his books. I'm not talking about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or the book about the Hells Angels. I'm talking about his actual journalism.
I've read a good amount of that, like Great Shark Hunt and some of those.
Yeah.
Those are really good. Yeah.
And then Didion has these big collections, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and then later the White Album and stuff that sort of takes you through the 60s and the 70s, and sort of combines everything together: the hippies, the music, the Mansons, all this sort of stuff. But I tell you something. I mean, this sort of thing, I don't think really is the sort of thing that you bring a specific academic expertise to. I think it is something you do when you're interested in the intersection of a bunch of independent things that you're interested in. And so I'm not drawing from any particular academic tradition or trail. I mean, I've read social and cultural critics, like I've already mentioned. I've read Marshall McLuhan. I've read, all this sort of stuff that's relevant. But there's no specific academic area that is sort of cultural criticism. That's something that only exists in the popular media, right? Mm-hmm. There are things that are sort of related that are academic, like cultural studies, but that stuff is very heavily theoretical, very heavily invested in, especially in postmodern philosophy. I have no interest in it, and I don't think it really penetrates very much into popular media. You don't really, that stuff is very rarefied and it's in the academy. What I do is really just bring together a bunch of stuff that I'm interested in and have some knowledge of independently. Comics. What I know about comics is nothing. Not from. It's just the fact that I've been reading comics since 1973, right? I collected them. Same thing with films and television. So, but I do have a philosophy background, and I do have an aesthetics background, and I do have read quite a lot of Joan Didion and Hunter S. Thompson. So I sort of know instinct, sort of how you do this sort of thing. I guess that I would say that those people sort of helped me learn the mode. But the actual substance of it just comes from the eclectic mix of my own interests, and that's why I think anybody can do it. I mean, listen, Aria does it. That's what his whole show is. And the last one he did, I don't know if you watched the last one Aria did, is freaking amazing. It's with this guy who's written a book looking at Trump through the lens of the history of television.
Oh yes, I did hear that one.
Yeah, it's freaking amazing, right? And so I think you are qualified.
Well, the one thing
I'm doing it right now, right? You did it just for this entire dialogue, right? But yeah, go ahead.
The one thing that I've felt a bit reluctant to enter some of those areas of discussions, just in the sense that when I've heard other layers of analysis, I come from a point of view of being immersed in the creative process and learning how these individuals achieved what they achieved. And then sometimes there's this layer of analysis that comes in, and I feel like I'm sympathizing with the artist and going, you know what, I really don't think that was their intention. I don't think that that's necessarily, the relevance that they would want to bring to this discussion. And so I felt there wasn't as much value there, and I felt there was like maybe some invalid aspects to it, because I would think that the person would maybe disagree. But being immersed in this a little bit more, I've been finding interesting analysis and learning a lot, even when it's in tension with what I think that a creator may not have really intended at all their work to serve. Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't been all over I haven't looked through all the stuff that's in your platform, in your online platforms. But do you pretty much only create? You don't engage in any criticism or writing about? I have in the past. I was a film critic when I was in college, and I continued that just sort of informally online for a while. Yeah. But I haven't done it in a very long time.
Yeah. And look, I mean, so I teach aesthetics, and I'm teaching it right now. And what's interesting about that class is that about half the students are philosophy majors, and so they're really good at analysis, right? Mm-hmm. Other half of the students are studio artists, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a large draw for the class from the art and design side of the university. They bring something entirely different. They're not really particularly great at analysis, but they have intimate understanding of the creative process, right? And I find that the two of them together, they each learn from the other, mm-hmm. and the sum total of it is usually a really outstanding conversation. And so I think that you coming from the creator side of it, it's ideal to speak to someone, let's say like me or somebody else who's not a creator in the arts. I mean, I write, but I write more I write philosophy, and then I write in sort of the essay format. I mean, there is art to it, but it mm-hmm. isn't art. It's not literature. And so, I actually think that it's a sort of perfect intersection. I think if everybody's coming from the critical side, then you have no real understanding of the creative process. A lot of critics I read really annoy me because it seems to be quite clear they have no idea how the stuff is made, right? Yeah. And if you have it all artist side, the problem there is that they're all very instinctive and intuitive, but they don't really have a great an analytical mind, right? And so I think it's great to do sort of these things in kind of collaboration. But surely you have political views. Surely you have impressions and views of the contemporary scene you're in. And I just would never hesitate to bring them to bear on these sorts of conversations, because I really don't think there's really any expertise There's just experience and familiarity with the culture. It seems to me, and you're immersed in the culture, and so
a bit.
Well, one part of it, right? I mean, how do you feel? Just while I've just got you here, one more minute. We talked about the future of comedy, and I don't expect to say anything major about this. Maybe we'll talk about this more in the MCU, but maybe this will be a teaser. How are you feeling about the future of comics? I'm very concerned. I don't know how you feel about it.
I'm very concerned about one major pain point that's about to happen. I'm actually I'm actually doing a documentary that has one tiny connection to this. I filmed a documentary about it's going to be called NCBD, New Comic Book Day. New Comic Book Day is Wednesday. That's the day all the new floppy comics come out. Like I've got one here. Like here's you a standard X-Men comic. It comes in the little floppy format. It's 22 to 28 pages usually. Nowadays it costs $5. $5 for something that you can consume in a few minutes is a bit difficult. The economics of comics are very difficult right now.
I remember when they were under $1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there is a huge audience right now that's learning how to read what you call sequential storytelling, sequential art storytelling. That's the medium of comics. And that's coming online from kids reading manga. It's coming from the young adult market. There are a lot of fantastic, like the best-selling comics in the world right now are young adult comics. The most successful comic creator is a woman named Raina Telgemeier. A lot of people probably don't know who she is because her audience is, teenage level, but she sells a ridiculous amount of books. And those audiences, I think, are going to grow up and still like the medium of comics, I hope. So I think there is a bright future for comics. The pain point that's about to happen is right now the primary delivery mechanism for physical comic media is the local comic book store. And the niche audience they have.
So they're not buying them off Amazon.
There is that, and that is growing, and mobile device use is growing. But the actual bread and butter money that is sustaining the creators who do stuff like this,
interesting,
is still this unit right here. And then those get collected into a trade volume that's like, anywhere from like 3 to 7 issues of comic. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to skip the floppy. That's possibly going to die. And we're going to go
straight to the book.
Straight to the book. And how we make that transition is going to bankrupt some businesses. It's going to bankrupt some economic models. And it's going to create some chaos for a while. I don't know when this reckoning is coming, but it is
soon.
Something like this is going to happen soon because there's also demographic trends. The people who support mainstream comics, Marvel and DC, they call them the so-called Wednesday warriors. The people that go every Wednesday, they pick up their Batman, they pick up their Superman, pick up their Spider-Man. They are the economic blood that allows the brick and mortar stores to deliver the more niche and original things, the exciting stuff. But that niche audience is starting to age out, and how once that flow of revenue disappears, we don't know what the next phase is going to be. So
you see a good future.
Yes.
You're worried about how you're going to get to it. Sort of the in-between part is the part you're worried about.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people may get hurt in that in-between period.
Yeah, and that could risk the viability of the medium.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of the people that are successful right now, they move immediately into writing for TV and movies.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to want to talk about this with you in detail. Maybe when we do the future of MCU film, we can also then pivot over to the future of MC, right?
Right.
And then maybe speak more broadly about it. Okay, so thank you again. I'm going to say good night to everyone again, and I look forward to the next one.
Me too. Thanks.
Take care, man.